record. All right. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you that we can join together, fellowship in you, and use these technologies that we can talk and see each other. Lord, I just pray for those who still aren't with us. I pray for Ryan Nash, that he'll be able to get in here with us quickly, and I pray for Dr. Henry, that she'll be able to come in quickly. I know she was having some computer problems and not being able to get some of her files, and just pray, Lord, that you will resolve that issue, what's happening. So, Father, we pray that you'll guide us through these times. Just pray for strength and energy, and especially as we get into the evening when there's been a lot of things going on during the day. Pray for Maureen, Lord, that you'll just keep renewing her mind and her strength, and just give her all that she needs, Father, to accomplish these certifications and just the work that she wants to do, Lord. And continue to pray for my brother Noel here, Lord, that you just keep giving him direction and wisdom and the work you've given him there, Lord, in pastoring and working with the people. Just pray, Father, that you'll just teach and give each one of us what we need to do your work for us. And I praise you now in the name of your Son and our Savior Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Looks like Dr. Henry made it in. Hello, Dr. Henry.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Has your computer started cooperating yet?
Well, not really.
No?
I just have to work with what I have here.
Oh, my. You're just not able to access some of the files on the computer?
Well, my Word, my Office is what is giving me the problems.
I see.
So any file that I might try to access, some of them, I'm not getting the access, so I have to work on that. I've been working on that all weekend.
Yeah. Oh, my. Well, I pray that will get resolved soon. I think Debbie's been working with you a little bit on that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, she's real good at her work, so she's gotten me through quite a few tight spots.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she'll probably do well. Well, I'm hoping Ryan gets on here. I just talked with Ryan, and thought he was going to be able to get in. So I just had a long conversation with him on his project, since he has not been able to join us. And so let's kind of jump into some things here. Let me just share my screen for a moment, just so we kind of know what we're doing. Let's see. Okay. I just put this instruction sheet on the week 4, I think, as I emailed everyone. And it just kind of goes over some of the things that we've been already talking about, but I just find it helpful just to put it all in one document so that we can be looking at that and refer back to it. But you've worked on your problem statement and you uploaded that. We've given you some feedback on that. We're now kind of working on a purpose statement, and very specifically, we've been working on the research questions section, just so that we're looking at these matters together. The week 4 purpose statement, you've been developing research questions for your project for week 4. In week 4, you're going to bring these questions together into a purpose statement section in the template. I think you already did some of that, Noel, and I think you turned that in, but you can keep looking at that and turn it in this week too, if you see some other issues you want to change. The essential components of a purpose statement for our purposes is there's kind of an introduction section, just the overall intent. Begin this section with a paragraph that summarizes the overall intent of the project, including your desired outcomes. Second big section is these research questions that we're working on. It says you may identify one overarching question and then include 3 to 5 subordinate research questions or research questions to define what you want to know through the project. Final project proposal template provides a summary of the various categories of content that should be included in the research questions. And then finally, in this purpose statement section will be the intervention strategy. Here you just provide a brief description of the kind of a practical strategy that you're going to develop as an intervention that will help you address the problem in some practical way. Here in the purpose statement, you'll just kind of summarize that transformational strategy in a paragraph. You'll then describe that in more detail when you get to chapter 3, which is the research methodology chapter. But we just, for your reader, the reader would just kind of would get a good summary of that transformational strategy. And I'll talk a little more about that. I sometimes just use an example that I use in different classes. If I was working with gang violence in Seattle, trying to help maybe churches and other organizations engage in some meaningful ministry to gang members. I might say, what are the reasons for gang activity in Seattle, Washington area? How can churches become involved in effectively addressing this issue? I might have some subordinate questions, who are typical gang members in the Seattle area and why do people join gangs? Number 2, what insights from adolescent psychology and theology may contribute to an understanding of gang membership and activities? Be part of my theoretical framework for this particular study. How are churches and other organizations currently involved in gang-related work in the Seattle area? I want to kind of get an understanding of what's going on right now in terms of work that other organizations are doing, and what kind of programs would be effective in ministering to gang members. And again, that's where I begin to work on my transformational strategy, some practical means that I'm going to begin to address this problem after I've looked at some of my research, some of the empirical research. And so you can kind of look at this instruction sheet. It's under the files area on week 4. Like I said, make sure that you do use the final project proposal template for all your weekly assignments. Let's jump over to the, let's jump over here for a moment. This is the template that you've been using that I need you to use, making sure that you are doing your work in this template. And what I've tried to do is in the template, giving you some, just brief description of that section, again, just to go over things that you've done over in this class. But, a problem statement, we've talked about the fact that we maybe have, again, maybe 3 sections. You start out with an introductory paragraph or 2. Then you give a few examples of research that documents the existence of the problem. And then you'd end a paragraph describing the significance, the uniqueness of your project as you're looking at, other kind of work that's been done. Context, you've kind of been, some of you have already started working on that. Again, just giving a brief context for your readers so they know, who are the people that you think were going to be involved in your project. Including issues such as the history of that people, worldview, values, beliefs, demography, the project location, if there's some prominent features that might be helpful for the reader to get a sense of where you're working on your research. What's the current situation there as you're dealing with it? If you're dealing with, teen pregnancy, Noel, you'd maybe just say a few words about the situation there. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the beneficiaries? As well as the people who may be instrumental in implementing your project. So anyway, kind of those are the first 2 sections, of that introductory chapter, statement of the problem, context of the problem. Then in this section that we're kind of working on right now for the last couple of weeks, the intent, summarize what you want to do through this project. What are your objectives? We're talking about the research questions that we've been working with. The research questions should kind of, you want to make sure, for one thing, and I'll tell students this many times, sometimes it's just almost stated, taken for granted that the issue is a problem. For example, if you tell me, teen pregnancy is a problem, but you don't give me any working knowledge, any literature, or any other studies that really document that, then the project right from the beginning is not really valid because you haven't really supported the fact that this is indeed a situation. So the existence and the extent of the problem might be something to do with your research, that you might ask a research question in that frame. The theoretical framework, again, what are some of the literature that might be needed? I mentioned looking at adolescent psychology when I was talking about gangs. You might be doing the same thing, Noel. You might be looking at some adolescent psychology issues. You also mentioned some theology issues in your particular project. Possible solutions to the problem to be implemented. Again, this is the intervention strategy, and any theological issues that are related to the problem. At least from my perspective, these are all categories of research questions that help the reader understand both, the empirical research that you're doing, the literature research that you're doing in terms of some of the theoretical framework, the models, the disciplines, theoretical disciplines that can be applied to your particular issue. And then from our perspective at BGU, any theological issues that could be applied to the situation that you're dealing with. State that in terms of a research question. So that's what we've been talking about. And then this transformational strategy, which is the third section of this purpose statement, provide a summary of the practical transformational intervention strategy that you'll develop, implement, and test to begin to address the problem. And you describe that in more detail later. But, you may design a seminar, a curriculum, a community asset development program. BGU students have done all kinds of practical strategies to begin some kind of work in their communities or their organization. Okay, so that's the one issue that we really insist upon at BGU, that once you've gotten through the empirical research and you've thought through everything along those lines, that you also then begin developing a concrete practical strategy that will address the problem. You're not going to address the whole problem, we understand that, but it's something that begins to a place where you can begin to even share some of your research and begin to maybe train people on some issues, or small groups. Some people have developed small groups. Training programs, entrepreneurial training programs that you're thinking there, Maureen, in terms of entrepreneurship. I've got one lady over in Michigan, here in the States, that she's put together an entrepreneurial training program for women, especially women who are financially challenged. And she has what she calls a GEMS program. And she's the organization she's put together is both a funding organization. She's been able to mobilize some other businesses who are helping fund women who are wanting to go into entrepreneurial endeavors. And then she's providing ongoing mentoring and coaching for those women that are seeking to move into some kind of an entrepreneurial work. So that's Carmen Thomas, again, and she is again in Michigan. She's working on her dissertation this year. So once that's finished up, you might want to talk with Carmen and get some ideas in terms of what she's been doing over there in Michigan in terms of the work with women, especially in entrepreneurial endeavors. I'm going to stop there. What kind of questions, thoughts are you working with as you're thinking about your research questions? Anything that comes to mind? I was just talking with Ryan. Maybe I'll just mention some of the issues that we were wrestling with for Ryan. Because in the discussion forums that you've been working with, Ryan is wanting to do something in the area of looking at companies and their clients, and even their employees, and he's using the term symbiotic relationship. And how will that concept apply to, company-client relationships, company leadership, employee relationships, but very especially in terms of the company and clients. And we were just kind of talking about how how to go about that kind of a study, what kind of questions need to be asked. And I think, Ryan, you had some good questions there in the discussion board I was looking at. Like I told Ryan earlier, though, probably the beginning point for him is he's thinking about some research questions, what he wants to find out, what is involved, for example, in a symbiotic relationship between a company and clients that seems to be helpful for ongoing relationships and ongoing clients and longevity of relationships between companies and clients. I said, thinking about what you want to know, and then another point is to determine what companies does he already know of, that he maybe has some network already established where he could begin to have some leaders in other companies that he could talk to. And so we were just starting to work on that topic a little bit in terms of how to go about researching that kind of an issue. And then you would want to think about what kind of a practical strategy might be used to help companies move in that direction. I was thinking you might even be able to design an organizational assessment process that would help a company go through some self-reflection to maybe even help a company, and try that out in a company, kind of an assessment process that would help them look at their own values and look at how they are currently functioning with clients. That could be a practical strategy after you've done some of your research, that you might be able to design some kind of an assessment process that companies could use to look at their own values and relationships with clients. Just a possibility.
Dr. Payne.
Go ahead.
I have been trying to, I was clicking the mute button at the wrong place, so I wasn't able to jump in at the time I wanted to. Thanks for the suggestion about Thomas, but the fact that I did not hand in my assignment, you would not have seen that, well, based on what I had written in the intent last week, I was developing on that, because that's something that I also have included in mine. As a matter of fact, when I was coming to the BGU program, like a colleague of mine said, she didn't know that she was going to be doing so much theology. There's a theology for everything. And that for me was rather new, and I didn't understand that, that's how we're going to proceed. But that said, once I was in, I decided whatever it is I'm going to say and to complete it, But I remember in talking, because I had an interview before I registered with Diana Backey, and I remembered sharing with her my concern and wanting to develop a microfinance organization, because it's something that I had done work in for another organization. I had developed this program and so on and whatever. But I didn't see how it would have happened. But then when I had to do this research, it came back to me that this was a good way to incorporate that. So when you said that Carmen Thomas was doing the same thing, I said, well, maybe that's what the Lord is saying to us as Christian women, that this microfinance industry, which so many persons are using only for profit, but with development in mind, it's something that us as Christians need to be doing as well. I have another concern, though, separate and apart from my particular project. Something that I have been concerned about is the fact that I did not do AI, what is that again? Whatever. And ABCD, the development, those two development kind of intervention strategies, whatever. Advantage. Because I don't have that kind of theoretical base. Does it mean that I'm going to have to go and find out what that is, or get more in-depth information on that in order to practically, satisfy the BGU requirement, or, I'll be able to do it without having done the school. I did do the servant leadership course, but I never did theology at work either.
Okay.
Thinking about that.
Did you ever take the theology of work course?
No, I didn't. I actually bought all the books for it, and they're at home in Jamaica. But
Okay. To
last
me,
year
I mean,
last year was too confusing for me after the death of my father, so I
okay.
never registered for any courses after that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's really what starts to help you have some of the, we call them theoretical models, but I mean, they're very practical models. Theology of work is there's a theology of work in terms of, why somebody would even want to be involved in work. Why would a woman want to even be involved in entrepreneurship? And you've already talked about, using some examples from the Bible, but, theology of work will look at the whole issue that even as we are made by a God who works, we look at the work of creation. We who are made in God's image are also workers, and that a lot of our meaning is the fact that we are doing creative kinds of endeavors. Call it work, whatever you want to call it, but that theology of work could be a part of your theoretical framework, for example, when you're thinking about women in entrepreneurial work. So that's how that might fit with what you're thinking.
So Dr. Payne, I have a layman's perspective on work. I mean, just for my own self. I mean, I am motivated by hard work. I'm motivated to accomplish things. I like to achieve. I like success, and so I have all those things. But when I was thinking about some of the sharing I've had from persons who've done this degree, they did those courses and I have not, and I'm almost at the end, and I don't want to do theology of work or any of those. The final course that I'm supposed to be doing, that I would like to do, has to do with this woman stuff. I don't remember whatever it is, but it's because you see that is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I wondered, do I have to develop my own theology? In other words, that's what is bothering me. I have to develop my own theology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think the theology of work would be an applicable topic is to include in your research, it seems to me then you would do some reading in that. And even if, as you find specific theology of work sources that could even apply very specifically to women in their theology of work.
Okay.
How has God created that woman, and how is her meaning, even as a person, possibly involved with her ability to work and create and be productive? All those are issues of theology of work that to me would be applicable topics to entrepreneurship in relationship to women. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here right now, but I mean that's something you might want to look at as you're looking at some of your literature.
Dr. Payne, I would like to ask some questions of each of the students. And the reason why I'm asking these questions is right now we're on the, as it were, the ground floor. I call it the ground floor of the research, in the sense that we are seeking to understand, to come to a focus point in terms of what our research will actually be. So my questions are designed to get students to focus, because usually when we start out thinking about research, any kind of research topic, we tend to go very broad. But in order to accomplish the actual research, you have to be able to, it's like a funnel, and you have to be able to focus to something that is manageable. So as I've been listening, I've been making notes, and Ryan is with us. I'm not seeing, but I'm assuming that he is with us.
Yes,
But
Ryan is with us.
okay, I'm going to start with Maureen, because she just spoke, and there's some things that jumped out at me as Maureen shared her interests. My sense has been that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maureen, that your interest is to look at women in entrepreneurship. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. That your interest is in women in entrepreneurship. Now, just now as you spoke, and I think last week you mentioned the issue of microfinance. So my question to you is, do you see a link between microfinance and entrepreneurship? And if so, what is that link? And is that link of significance that it would impact your proposed study?
Well, Dr. Henry, last week you talked about big questions. My time to use your term.
Say that again?
Last week you spoke about big questions. And now I'm saying it's my time to use your big question.
Okay.
But okay, so the reason why I brought up microfinance again was the fact that you just mentioned a particular study that is being done by another BGU person. But yes, to come directly to your question, microfinance is a very important component. It may not take up all of my study, but one of the biggest.
I'm not hearing you very well. Let me see if I need to put my sound up. Okay.
Can you hear me better?
Not really. And I thought I put mine up.
Yeah, Maureen's audio is a little low.
Okay, that's what I thought. Because I put mine up.
What I'm supposed to do. But anyway, let me try. Can you hear better?
A little, but it's not very clear.
Because I'm not using a headphone.
Okay.
I've had to use one. I find that the headphone sometimes cause the thing to get more rusty. But what I was saying is that yes, I think that microfinance is an important component, but it's not the biggest part of the study or anything. I think it is just one of the components when you look at women in entrepreneurship. The thing that I believe that is more unique, and I would hope would be more unique about this study, is having to do with Christian women.
Okay.
Why women of faith, whether they get involved or not get involved in entrepreneurship. I'm trying to be careful about asking or using negative questions, which is still challenging me. But the issue of microfinance is very important, because one of the things that we know about in development is that women traditionally have a more difficult time in getting financing for their projects. If they have a project, if they're interested, and sometimes persons are afraid of going into entrepreneurial venture because I think they have the wherewithal funding. And so microfinance was offered or is being offered as one of the ways to overcome that challenge. So that is not unique to Christian women. Have I answered?
Yes. But what I thought I hear you say is that the concept of microfinance may have something to do with women and entrepreneurship. And so I guess I would wait to see how you would build that into your study. And I guess my question to you would be, have you seen anything in the research literature on entrepreneurship that suggests that, well, women as entrepreneurs, that would suggest that microfinancing has a role to play?
A lot. There are studies upon studies. The World Bank, yeah, there's an organization, the World Bank organization, CGAP,
Oh,
sends out
I
information
guess.
on this. And there's a big focus. One of the thing in this thing about the development goals is of trying to empower, the overworked word, women, is to get them into financing.
Okay. Okay. Good. That answers my question.
I want to just say one more thing though, that one thing about when you talk about microfinancing though is that it's as if your research, your project, whatever it is, skewed to smaller kind of business. And I don't want to be already doing that, because there are persons who have entrepreneurial ideas or could expand their entrepreneurial ideas that are based upon their technical competence. Let's say, for example, the use of like those panels that they use for making solar heaters and so on and so forth. There's
Yes.
a huge thing to do with stuff like that. Now, somebody getting into a project like that is not the kind of thing that microfinancing will help. You'll have to develop a proper proposal and go to a real bank. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So there are other development agencies and development money that is available.
Okay.
That kind of thing, because there is this big push again to do with environment and greening and that sort of thing. So I don't want to only be looking at microfinance, because microfinance suggests that it's things that tend to be more of a lower level.
Okay. So hearing you say that, then I think perhaps what you may want to put in there as another variable in your study may not necessarily be microfinance, but the whole issue of financing.
Yes.
Yeah, that to me is what may be the more useful terminology to just look at.
Well,
The
I have
role
not
of
finished writing, and won't finish writing for another long time, and I pray it won't be too long. But definitely, because that is one of the biggest thing that has really kept women from being entrepreneurial.
okay.
From time immemorial, women had to prove 3 and 4 times that they are better than men in getting financing.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Ryan, sorry. If I may ask the question of Ryan, well, Dr. Payne was sharing what he had discussed with you, and there are 4 terms that I saw coming together there, and I just wanted to get some clarity on the focus. It was companies, clients, employees, and symbiotic relationship. So I just wanted to understand your own interests in bringing those concepts together. I may be wrong, but that is what I was getting from, as Dr. Payne described, your proposed study.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you.
Okay. So yes, my proposal is that the symbiotic relationship is more important than profit. That profit will come based on that relationship. That companies who have relationships with their employees and their clients that are beyond client, basically saying that it should be hard for a client to fire a company. That the relationship should be able to withstand storms, mistakes in service, or anything. That the relationship and the values are so closely knit together that the relationship will survive whatever comes between the two, and that product and profit will still be produced. Not as it is in our capitalist world where we go to business to make money, but probably will become a product of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then my next question, and this is a question I ask each of you: have you seen anything in the literature that describes or defines this symbiotic relationship? How, and if so, how is that defined? How is this symbiotic relationship defined and described?
Actually, no, I haven't seen it anywhere. It's a unique concept that I came up with myself.
Okay, well, I'm going to propose, therefore, that you find support in the literature for this term, because I think hearing you express it, it seems to be an important piece or variable in the study that you're proposing to look at. So it would be to your advantage to find support in the research literature for this that you describe as a symbiotic relationship. It may not be that the literature I'm sorry, uses the term symbiotic relationship, but the meaning may be there. It may be another term that is used in the literature. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Bill. One of the issues we were just talking about earlier was that just that very issue, that term may or may not be used in literature relating to client-company relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of other. We started talking about values. And when I teach the organizational assessment course, we talk about the values of a company, how those values align with the values of a client.
Okay.
And when those aren't in alignment, we can have some tension, some problems.
Sure.
We can look at, the whole issue of organizational assessment, which is a big topic. Understanding the values of an organization is a major piece of that organizational assessment.
Yes.
And then, Peter Drucker will ask, how do the values of the company relate to the values of customers? So we may not find the term symbiotic, but we're going to be able to find something in the area of values, for example, and the culture of an organization. Those are the keywords I would begin to look for, as I was telling Ryan.
Okay. Okay. No, I guess, Noel, you're not off the hook. My question to you would be, and I know your focus is teenage pregnancy, and help me along it because I don't want to misinterpret you, but it's about the how do you, it seems to me that what you want to look at is how do you mitigate the effects of teenage pregnancy. Am I right? But I want to allow you to describe it, and then I ask my questions.
Okay. Well, there are lots of studies that were done on teenage pregnancy in a number of areas.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first thought of it, I wanted to look at it from a standpoint of including the male, because I think I just saw one study so far where they just brush over the absent male, and I think it was a study done in Africa.
Okay.
And the male factor is something that I have experienced with those teenagers, where even before the baby is born, the male is nowhere to be found. And if the male is there, the trauma, the whatever, is only on the women and the girls. Only Sunday I was discussing with the church, talking about teenage pregnancy and the community adaptation to it and this norm and so forth. And coming out from that, from what I was saying, because I had what you call like a messy, I call it messy Sunday, where the congregation get a chance to talk social things and blend it back with the spiritual realm and so forth. And so I got a number of different angles to it, why the mother would accept, why community is accepting, and why the girl feel so empowered to go to pregnancy too. Saying all of that, I am thinking that there must be something that can be done to cause them to not engage or initiate until they are at that acceptable age. And this is outside of whether they were raped or abused or outside of that. That's force. I'm talking about themselves getting into the act, whether younger male like themselves or older male. And so I am thinking that I want to set up something working with different organizations, and I've listed a few. One of the biggest one is the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Health. In those two areas, we come together with their young people. So the pregnant or the mother, so in the public health setting, and at school, the girl at 10 or maybe 11, just before she gets to that puberty teenage age, to begin to instill the type of knowledge so that they will delay the initiation. They will be strong enough to say no rather than not understanding why and what is it they're getting into. So I hope that this explains.
Okay. I am just going to make some observations in terms of it seemed to me that you probably are aiming to propose a program that would reduce the incidence of teenage pregnancy. That seems to be where you're headed, a program to reduce the incidence of teenage pregnancy. I just want to propose that there are quite a few studies on programs that have been developed and put in place to reduce the incidence of teenage pregnancy. There's quite a bit of that out there. However, teenage pregnancy is a multifaceted incident. It's rooted, very much rooted in both in socio-cultural and psychological factors. And any program that would seek to address or to reduce teenage pregnancy needs to understand that there are psychosocial, cultural factors, and that when you talk of education, it's not education that is focused on the cognitive, on the mental. No, that is important, but for the education to be effective in the realm of teenage pregnancy, it has to be education that focuses on the psychological and the emotional. And that kind of education is demanding and not as straightforward as cognitive input. So I'm just throwing that out for your awareness.
Yes, that's true.
And there are lots of studies that have been done to address the issue of reducing teenage pregnancy. So that's what I would throw there.
But the Dr. Henry, there is also one of the main reasons for the reduction, trying to reduce it, trying to prevent the initiation of sexual intercourse is when the teenage become pregnant. There's lots of studies that show, and in my own practice that I have seen, because I'm a medical person, I'm a midwife, I've done deliveries and so forth. And I have seen and I have read about a number of factors that will warrant them not getting into too early pregnancy. Things to do with labor and delivery and physical problems and maternal problems. Those are some of the challenges. And I would have attempted to speak to some people. I'm doing that now. I got one or two young girls in the church, and I began to talk to them on that issue. About what are some of the things if they are not monitored closely at the antenatal clinic. So that too are challenges in the programming. While this psychosocial aspect of it is important, the cognitive aspect of it is also important, because it becomes more in helping them to understand it from that way. The psychosocial part will play an even better role, because if they don't understand why, then they won't understand why the behavior must be different.
And as I listen to you, the term came to my mind. I don't know if you've thought about it. The whole issue of abstinence.
Abstinence,
Yes, abstinence. Well, that is the best prevention.
Yes.
But very old-fashioned.
That is the best prevention. I just throw that out. Have you thought about that? as
Yeah,
part of the programming factor?
Part of the programming factor, abstinence, of course, because remember, it's going to be a holistic thing.
Okay.
From the spiritual standpoint, the biblical standpoint, abstinence, 1, 2, 3, 4. And from the other standpoint, if you cannot abstain, then these are some of the repercussions, these are some of the consequences, these are some of the economic scenarios, family woes, and etc. etc. Yeah. And as I said, I'm not too sure if I had said it, but I'm going to say it now. I have my own TV program that I have been using to do holistic ministry. And so I will speak on things of health, and, diabetes, hypertension, talk about some maternal challenges, talk about speech and language. So different things I would do at different time. And, so that program, as I said, will be one of the stepping stone. One to be, and it's aired weekly, and it's on the national program, so national broadcast.
Okay.
So for across Guyana, people will hear it simultaneously. It's kind of household program, and so it's. I think that is one of the areas that I would use to roll out that program, apart from Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education.
Okay.
Yes. Hope I'm making sense.
Yes, you are making sense. I'm just seeing it as it is a big
yes, it's
project,
big,
but not unmanageable or not
That's right.
impossible.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
There is Dr. Payne, if you could scroll down, I think, to the questions. That last question, number 7.
What can biblical exposure impact?
If I may throw cold water on that.
You want to throw cold water in it? Okay.
The incidence of sexual activity outside and inside the church, like divorce, is the same thing. There's no difference. And that is one of the most damning condemnation of the effectiveness of the church. There is no difference. And it is a challenge.
Yeah.
It is a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can relook at that.
It doesn't mean that question shouldn't be asked.
No. Yeah, I know.
It has been answered in the society, and the answer doesn't.
I'm gonna throw in one other issue, and I'm not sure if it even applies here, but a few of us have been looking at studies on how various cultures use, shame, honor is one dichotomy. We in Western civilization, we kind of use, guilt, innocence. But I'm not quite sure how that even fits in a Guyanese culture. Shame and honor. Do those concepts even have any meaning in relationship to teen pregnancy?
Yeah. Let me go from the church standpoint. If a young girl gets pregnant in the church, that of yesteryear, a few years ago, they were removed from doing anything because they were seen as sinners. The parents were taught to be loose people, not caring, not protecting, not doing what they're supposed to do. Hence, the girl wander off and get pregnant. And a number of spin-off occur from that, including sending a girl away from the village to another village to get baby, including somebody else claiming the baby as their child, so as to remove that kind of a stigma from the girl. But today, society picks up on it, flare up when the girl get pregnant, but as soon as the baby is born, no shame, no guilt, everybody embraces. And then, in my own thinking, the girl feels wonderful and powerful now. I can go get a next one. And so we end up getting number 2, number 3 along those lines. So yes, there is shame, yes, there is guilt, but they find a way to embrace it. They find a way to embrace it.
Okay. The other issue I probably want you to look at least studies I had looked at in the United States, say over the last 10, 15 years, teen pregnancy has actually gone down. It would be interesting to understand and look at factors, what factors are contributing to that decline in teen pregnancy, say, in the United States, and compare that to, say, Guyana.
Yes, I have looked at that, and I think one of the major things has to do with the whole adolescent health, and the whole aspect of adolescent health is the same thing that I'm thinking about program to teach them. We have something in the schools, and that's why I want to log on to the schools, that we call health and family life education. When I used to be director for the health sciences education, that was one of the programs we were rolling off from a health standpoint. But now it's in an education standpoint where they feel that it ought to be taught earlier. Yeah, I think it ought to be taught earlier. So it comes under the health promotion, health education aspect, where that type of teaching is happening. Sexuality, things on HIV and AIDS, and some of those things are built into that health and family life education.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you're thinking maybe some of those factors actually have contributed to that.
Contributed,
in, say, in the United States.
Yes. But in Guyana, it has not rolled off effectively. And I think that the rise for us in our among our indigenous community is because they too need to be edified in it. I was looking at a study recently from Grenada, where the Caribbean, it has gone down a little bit, but Grenada, it has escalated. And so, and that is a 2012 study, I think, which is recent. That is not so long. So I think they're in the same plight as Guyana, where that is happening. And we have a number of things that incest and things, rape and all manner of things, force things that result in pregnancy. The result in pregnancy. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the literature will help me to unravel it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's good, a good thinking process. I think what we're trying to do is just really wrestling with these issues. And I guess what we're trying to do when we're looking at research questions, we're trying to look at issues from as many angles as possible and then see what kind, where do we want to zero in on?
Yes.
We're looking at our study. Like we say, any of these topics are large topics.
Yes.
And it's finding I'll use the word, the angle or the approach that we that we want to take. And whether we're dealing with companies that, like Ryan is dealing, or women entrepreneurship or teen pregnancy, there's a lot of different ways you can address those topics. And so it's finding what's the best way from your approach, your context, your theoretical framework, concepts that you want to apply.
Yeah.
So and that's kind of a general statement, but okay. All right. What do I have here? We've got only about 10 more minutes in this session, 10 or 15 more minutes. I'm trying to hold these sessions to an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I know Dr. Henry had a PowerPoint, but she was having difficulty getting to those. Is that true, Dr. Henry?
Yes, let me see. Well, actually, I was able to do one that is in, it's not a PowerPoint, it's.
Well, let me stop sharing. You could share a second.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We don't say I have a lot of time, but I would like to introduce some topics. We talked about basic assumptions and definitions, and I'm not sure what you have, what a document you have that is working. Assumptions? Okay, that would be good if you can maybe even share a little bit on that.
Yeah.
That'll be for next week. We'll kind of delve into assumption, but I would like to introduce that topic today.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, it's a PDF. Research assumptions, okay. The assumption is a realistic expectation, which is something that we believe to be true, but there's no adequate evidence to support the belief. In other words, it's an act of faith which does not have empirical evidence to support. Assumption provides a basis to develop theories and research instruments, and therefore influence the development and the implementation of the research process. Now, one of the ways in which I like to look at it is we have, and we'll see that this later in this presentation, you have assumptions and then you have hypotheses. And I like to define the hypotheses as a testable assumption. And it's interesting as we discuss your various research interests, I could hear the underlying assumptions of your study. And in some cases, you actually verbalize it. But whenever we start to think of research, we usually start with some assumptions about the relationships of variables of our studies. For example, in the case of Ryan, he has made some assumptions about the relationship between companies, clients, and employees. And he used the term to describe that relationship, which he calls a symbiotic relationship. So that represents an assumption. Now, if you develop that and you find evidence in the research and define it, then you're going to end up testing that assumption. You're going to propose a hypothesis in terms of these, the relationship between these three variables, the company, the client, and the employee. So then your assumption becomes a testable hypothesis. And that's just a quick review. Sorry, I should go down. The assumptions are statements that are taken for granted and are considered true. In talking about women and entrepreneurship, the one assumption that I hear Maureen verbalizing is the difficulty that women face in getting finances to become entrepreneurs. That's an assumption, and her study will test that assumption. Assumptions are principles; those are accepted as being true based on logic or reason, but without necessary proof or verification. But they are an integral part of the foundation thinking that leads us to do research. So we have assumptions and we have hypotheses. The assumptions are basically beliefs. The hypothesis is a prediction. So to take Maureen's example in terms of women and entrepreneurship, she might, putting words in your mouth, Maureen, you might predict that women do not become involved in entrepreneurship because of lack of finances, lack of the availability of finances. That's a prediction. And I think it is a fair prediction. So your assumption then becomes a hypothesis. Often, in terms of assumption, there's little or no evidence, or there's no statistically tested research. But in terms of the hypothesis, the important thing about a hypothesis is that it can be statistically tested, or it may be accepted or rejected. Let me just point out that when it comes to quantitative research, we usually talk about hypothesis, the underlying hypothesis that is tested. With qualitative research, what happens is that as a result of your research, by the end of your study, a qualitative study, you will propose hypotheses that could be tested in a study that furthers your study. So in either one of them, the hypothesis is important. But with the quantitative research, the hypothesis represents that which is going to be tested in the research quantitatively. The assumption is usually based on the beliefs the researchers attempt to discover the correlation. The hypothesis predicts a relationship between variables, and then these are statistically tested. Questions, comments on what I've just shared with you about assumptions and hypothesis? Does it make sense to you?
Let me ask you a question. This is Bill.
Sure.
If we're thinking of a assumption and a hypothesis, would it be accurate to say that an assumption is not testable? Or are we going to say it depends? I mean, if I say, you know, I take for granted there is God, and I say, but can I prove that through some series of, you know, hypotheses and tests? Not necessarily. But that's an assumption that I base my life on.
Sure, and we're going to talk about that later in this presentation. Yes, the assumption is a belief that you have that has not been tested or cannot be tested.
And that's what I'm wondering, if we'd have to say it cannot be tested.
Well, you can test when you move from assumption to hypothesis, then you can test.
Okay.
So the assumption is your fundamental thinking about the relationship between the key variables of your study, whatever that study may be. In the case of Noel, there's several assumptions I hear coming through in terms of teenage pregnancy. He mentioned the male factor, and I think the assumption that I hear coming from him in terms of teenage pregnancy is that the male involvement absents itself very early in teenage pregnancy. The male involvement absents itself. That's how I would put it, and that has implications for the outcome of the teenage pregnancy. That's an assumption. We can move that assumption to make it a hypothesis that we test. Not easy to test necessarily, but we can propose that. Excuse me. Does that answer your question, Dr. Payne?
Let me expand it just a little bit more. If a person was going to include something in this section in terms of an assumption, a bias, I'm thinking it's not necessarily going to be an issue that is necessarily going to be tested in this particular thesis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I just stated, you know, I am a Christian and so I tend to have a Christian worldview,
Mm-hmm.
it isn't necessarily true that I'm going to test that assumption within this particular dissertation. I'm simply stating that.
You're making a statement of
Assumption. I'm just stating that to the reader so the reader understands my worldview, not necessarily that I'm going to test that particular worldview within this particular dissertation.
Okay, and the point here is that when it comes to research, to doing research, we have to be able to articulate everything. Now, any study that you propose, it would be clear to somebody listening to you that you have certain assumptions. As a researcher, what you're required to do is to articulate those assumptions.
Right.
A good researcher must articulate his or her assumptions, but they're usually clear to the person whom you are sharing your ideas with. What you have to do as a researcher, however, is to acknowledge that I'm coming to this with certain assumptions. Mm-hmm. Now, I may decide to develop the assumptions into hypotheses, which I will test, which my research will test. Does that make sense?
Right. What I'm thinking in this section, though, a student would say, okay, this is a worldview, or say this is a bias. I think we said a week ago, we said, you know, I'm not necessarily going to try to eliminate my biases, but I'm going to acknowledge them to the reader so the reader at least knows where I'm coming from. And so it would need to be stated in this section, this is not an assumption that I'm going to test within this dissertation.
Right.
But this is an assumption that I want the reader to understand my particular
These are the underlying
bias.
assumptions of this study, right?
Right.
And again, because of the nature of research, you also want to document or give evidence that your assumption is not unique. So you will reference some other research or somebody's research on that too, you know, in a good piece of research, because you want to make clear that your assumption or your bias is not necessarily unique.
I see.
Okay?
We'll see what, as we start working on this section, we'll do this next week. Probably be helpful as we look at some concrete examples.
Right.
And then we can maybe kind of work on this a little more. Maybe that'll become more clear. I mean, because this is an issue I'm wrestling with too. But both Cresswell and Miriam both talk about those areas of assumptions. So make sure you read on those a little bit, and we can talk a little more on those next week.
Right.
Unfortunately, go ahead. Yeah, we're just about out of time. So
okay, I'll just do this last one. The uses of assumption in research. Research is built upon assumptions since a foundation is needed to move forward. So that's what I started out by saying. It's foundational. One must assume something to discover something. Assumptions listed in research paper may be good sources of the research topics. The assumption provide the basis to conduct the research study, and tested assumptions, that is your hypothesis, through research studies expands the professional body of knowledge. Okay, so we'll stop there. And next week I could go on with this, and then after I've covered it, I will put it in the course portal.
Good, yeah. I mean, even in some of it, as you're reading some of the introduction chapters of both Miriam and Cresswell, each of those will talk about some of the different foundational preconceptions that certain kinds of research methodology, constructivism, for example, is, you know, the fact that their meaning is developed only through people's understanding of a situation or phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
where a more of an objectivist view is going to say, no, there is an objective reality that can be discovered apart from your meaning.
Yes.
Those are some assumptions that even a researcher is going to need to explain, say, the philosophical foundation
Yes.
a particular researcher is working from.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if we would want those included here in the research assumptions, or maybe that will go more into the research methodology when we're talking about our particular research method. And we could even talk about some of our philosophical beliefs in terms of the research method. But we'll get into that a little more. I don't want to get I know it's getting good for some of you folks. So some of this stuff is going to just go in and out one ear. So let's move to next week.
Okay.
All right. I appreciate these slides, though. These are very helpful just to begin to get some of these. Go ahead, Maureen.
This is not a research question. It's just a class. I was not able to respond to all of the posts by Saturday and that sort of thing and so on. Do we have an extension? I just couldn't.
Oh, you're cutting out on me, but this session has been recorded.
No, I'm saying that this doesn't have to be recorded. It has to do with Saturday. The fact that we were to do the 2 responses by Saturday to upload our assignment, and I wasn't able to do it. So do we have an extension so I can?
Oh, I see. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, try to keep up as much as possible. I understand situations come up, and that's fine. We need to finish all the work by the end of the term, but
I know.
But I do encourage you to keep up with the discussions, because that we're kind of working through a lot of these issues in the discussion,
Mm-hmm.
and try to stay current with the weekly assignments. I understand, you just went through a whole day of testing and stuff, and I know there's things that come up, but yeah, you can have an extension, absolutely.
Okay.
Don't worry about that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and close down the session, and we will continue our conversations in our discussion forums and in our classroom.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye now.
Goodbye.